So first up, congratulations, you're through the super nitty gritty part of what we're going to be doing because everything else we've got to talk about is in comparison far simpler. So I'm going to hop back over to the AWS console and I'm right where we left off in add tags. Now, what are tags? Tags are whatever you want them to be. Tags are just a key and value pair that you can put on your resource for organizational purposes. So I'm going to add a tag here and I'm just going to put learn EC2. And so the options here are instances. Do you want this here? You just straight up tells you right next to it. It'll tag every single instance with this, which you want, but you don't always want. So the option's there. And then also, do you want these tags to be applied to the volumes as well, which of course you can use to make sure that they're grouped and a little bit better organized. Now I do always add another tag here, name with a capital N. And we talked about this in the quick setup. I'm going to just name this second instance, if I can spell. And the name tag has a special meaning. The AWS and console, it interprets this name tag as what it should actually show as the name in the console itself. And so because of that, whenever you make a resource or something, whatever you want to see in the console, just make sure you put the capital N name and then whatever you want as the value and you're good to go. But what are tags used for? Well, tags are used as an organizational concept. So by organizational, I don't mean like an organization, like a company or something. I mean organizing, actually organizing. We only have a couple of instances here. But once you have a ton of different instances that are used for a ton of different purposes, you have multiple users going into your account, multiple services that you're running, it can get a little confusing to track the different things down. And so tagging is what lets us organize these a little bit better. Now, it's great and all that we've got these tags, but how do we use them? Or are we just adding random information we'll never use again? Well, when we did the quick setup, we actually gave that first instance these same two tags. Granted, we named the second one differently, but we can go ahead and just check out how we would find those. Let's say that we have 100 instances. How do we find that specific one named first instance? And maybe we want to find all of the ones tagged learn EC2. How would we do that? Well, what you want to do is come up here to resource groups. And in resource groups, we want to go to saved groups. So I'm going to open that in a new tab. This is going to take us to the AWS Systems Manager, which is, it's not new, but the organizing, the tag editor, and everything else under it is new. And under here, you want to click on Find Resources. And under Find Resources, we get this ability to query for resources. And you can query for tags. So if I want to find everything that's tagged Learn EC2, I would click Add. And so now that's part of the query. I can view query results. And there we go. We see that we have the instance that we created, that first instance, but we also have the volume we created. We have the volume we created because we left that second option picked. So tags are pretty simple, but as you can see, they can be very useful. They may not seem so just yet, but trust me, once you've got a ton of stuff set up in AWS, this will save you a good deal of time. So just always remember to tag and organize your resources as you make them. So let's hop back over here into the launch wizard. I'm going to leave these all as is, and we're going to go on to the next topic, the security groups. Okay, so we've already talked about security some. When we were doing the configure instance details, we talked about the IAM role. And the IAM role is how you gave EC2, so the server you're making, how you gave it the permission to interact with other AWS services. And largely that's what you're going to use IAM for. But on the other front of security, we have security groups. Now, security groups are basically firewalls, and we put them, you can think of it that we're putting them in front of a server to guard it from things trying to get to it. So just to use an analogy, because it's far simpler, if a server is a building and traffic is people outside the building trying to get in, well, then security groups would be a security guard that stands outside the building and only lets in certain people. So using the real terminology, a security group is a set of rules that sits between your instance and incoming traffic. If the traffic is allowed by the rule, then it's allowed in. If not, it's denied. Now, the main catch with security groups is that they are stateful. And this means that if traffic is allowed in, it is also allowed out. There is no piecemeal, okay, we're going to set up both what's allowed in and both what's allowed out. No. It is both. So meaning if it is allowed in, it is allowed out. But also if your server makes a request outbound, so maybe it reaches out to, say, the Facebook API. Well, because it initiated the request, the response from Facebook in this example would also be allowed back in. And it's stateful because the way that security groups work is they keep track of the connection. They keep track of the full end-to-end connection and deal with the whole thing. Unlike network ACLs, which are a VPC concept, which don't do both. Just because you're allowed in doesn't mean you're allowed out. But ignore that part. That dives back into VPCs, which we don't want to touch on. So let's select an existing security group and let's take a look at the first one we made. So these rules here represent what is allowed into that first instance we made. Well, HTTP traffic is allowed in on port 80 for both IPv4 and IPv6, and SSH traffic is allowed in on port 22 from anywhere. Well, let's go back and create a new security group and walk through this here. We'll call this second instance SG. And I'm actually going to just leave this description so I can save myself some typing. So when you create a security group, we have 5 things that we need to deal with here, even though most of them are going to get filled in. The first thing is the type of traffic. Now, in terms of type, most of this is just convenience because even though SSH is TCP 22 custom, I could just put in a custom TCP rule here. I could do 22 and it would all be the same. So just keep in mind that a lot of these are just convenience options. But so this is saying, hey, this is TCP type traffic under the TCP protocol on port 22 from where? Well, from anywhere. And then we'll just put SSH for admins with the right key. And then if you want more rules, because right now this is only going to let in SSH, we just click add rule. And so what type of traffic do we also want to allow? Well, since we're going to set this up to be an HTTP server, we'll select HTTP. And this will pre-fill a lot of these values for us. The protocol is TCP, the port range is 80, and as far as the source goes, both IPv4 and IPv6 from anywhere, and we'll just say HTTP access. And you can keep going. The one thing, the more advanced thing to keep in mind is that the sources of traffic that you allow don't just have to be from anywhere. They don't have to be an actual straight IP address. So what I mean by that is right now we're allowing SSH access from anywhere. And you know what? That's okay because we're using a public and private key pair. But if we really wanted to lock things down, we could say, all right, well, we only want SSH access to be allowed from a security group. Well, that's neat. And it is neat. So what this rule right here is saying is it's saying, hey, SSH access is allowed from what? Well, what this is saying is it's saying that it's allowed from anything that also has this security group. So in this example right here, this would be saying, hey, since our first instance that we created has this security group attached to it, that first instance would be able to SSH into the second instance that we've made here. And so that's the one thing. We're not going to do that, but what I wanted to show you here was that your source that you're blocking or allowing doesn't have to be an IP address or an IP range. It can be another security group. And you'll actually do that a lot when you're setting up in between services. You'll have an instance security group that is all the security rules for your servers. And then you'll have a database security group that is specific to the database. And instead of trying to find the IPs of every one of those instances and saying, hey, all of those instances can access my database, you just say, hey, if an instance has the instance security group, it can access the database. But obviously we don't need this right here, so we'll leave that as is. Okay, so that is it for the security groups. They're pretty simple, surprisingly. They're pretty well done in terms of understandability because you just see a list of rules here. And so that brings us to the review page. And we're going to do this in a separate video because we need to talk about key pairs.